August 28, 2025. The Kremlin's walls tremble, not from NATO bombs or Ukrainian artillery, but from the fury of a dictator who has just realized he has been humiliated on the world stage. Kim Jong-Un, the most isolated leader on the planet, has just declared war, not against the United States, not against South Korea, but against the one man he thought was his protector, Vladimir Putin. What you're about to witness is not a traditional military campaign. It is the story of betrayal, vengeance, and the catastrophic cost of underestimating a dictator whose pride was shattered. 40,000 North Korean troops, wiped out in Ukraine, fed into the grinder of Putin's failing war machine. And for the first time in decades, Kim Jong-un is striking back directly at a supposed ally. This isn't geopolitics. This is a mafia-style vendetta where blood debts are paid not in money, but in corpses. It began quietly in the early days of summer 2025. North Korean soldiers had been bleeding out on Ukrainian soil for months. Entire brigades disappeared into the mud of Kursk and Donetsk. Families back home received no answers. Letters went unanswered. Whole villages realized their sons were never coming back. State television showed nothing but victory parades, but the whispers were too loud to ignore. Even in one of the most tightly controlled societies on Earth, questions began to leak through the cracks. Why were elite North Korean units, trained for decades to fight the South, dying in Russia's war? Why were coffins returning in the dead of night, unloaded under heavy guard, hidden from the public eye? By July, the death toll had reached a staggering 40,000. That's not a statistic. That's an entire generation of fighting-aged men erased for a war they didn't choose. And then came the breaking point. At a state funeral held in Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un stood before thousands of weeping families. The coffins, draped in North Korean flags, stretched further than the eye could see. Cameras caught him clenching his fists so tightly his nails dug into his palms. His eyes were red, not just with grief, but with rage. For the supreme leader, whose entire image rests on absolute control, the sight of his military gutted was unbearable. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. For months he had played Putin's game, believing promises of advanced technology, food shipments, and nuclear assistance. But the truth was undeniable. He had been conned, humiliated, and bled dry. And when the realization hit, Kim Jong-un did what no one expected. He turned his fury not inward, not toward his generals or his people, but directly at Moscow. Russian intelligence sources now confirm what was once unthinkable. North Korean artillery units, positioned along the Russian border in Primorsky Krai, opened fire without warning on August 21st. Dozens of Russian outposts were obliterated in minutes. Videos smuggled out of the region show Russian soldiers scrambling, unprepared, stunned that their so-called ally had become their executioner. Eyewitnesses described the night sky lit up with rockets, the thunder of artillery rolling across the Amur River like an earthquake. Kim had unleashed his vengeance, and it was ruthless. For Putin, who had built his strategy on manipulation and deceit, this was the nightmare scenario, a pawn that refused to play its role, striking back with ferocity that even the Kremlin had underestimated. But Kim's attack wasn't random. It was calculated, methodical, and aimed at the very heart of Russia's vulnerability. He knew Putin's eastern defenses were weak, stripped bare to reinforce the crumbling front lines in Ukraine. He knew Russia's supply chains were stretched, its soldiers exhausted, its people weary of war. And most importantly, he knew Putin's ego couldn't withstand the humiliation of being attacked by the very man he had mocked and manipulated. Every rocket Kim fired wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. You turned me into the world's most expensive fool, and now you'll pay in blood. Western intelligence analysts are calling this the most dangerous rupture in authoritarian alliances since World War II.
On one hand, Putin is still bogged down in Ukraine, losing men and material at unsustainable rates. On the other, he now faces a furious dictator on his eastern flank, a man who no longer cares about consequences, who no longer fears sanctions, isolation, or even annihilation. Kim Jong-un has been psychologically broken, but out of that breakdown has emerged something even more dangerous, a dictator with nothing left to lose. And the scale of the violence is staggering. Reports indicate that in the first week of attacks, North Korean forces killed over 2,000 Russian soldiers, destroyed ammunition depots, and seized armored vehicles abandoned in the chaos. Russian commanders, blindsided, scrambled to redirect units